I introduce myself and others further, I'd like to take you through a few introductory slides so you know how to troubleshoot if you experience problems hearing. There are the best thing to do is to close your applications, any other applications that you have on your computer open, especially Lotus Notes or email or Skype. If you turn those off, that helps a lot. And you can also adjust your connection speed. If you do have problems, please submit a chat. Type in your problem to the moderators in the chat box under the chat, the moderators tab, and you and someone here will help you. So we will go on to some ground rules for today's session, just so that everyone is clear, not just on the ground rules, but also on the different ways that you can participate in the discussion today. So you can raise your hand to talk, and so then the facilitator knows to call on you. So let's practice here on the left. You will see in the above all the participant names on the left of your screen, a little hand. If you can press on that hand now, that would be great. I'd love to see some hands up from everybody. Wonderful. Keep going. I still see some that haven't put up their hands. Yes, keep going. Keep going. I still see Nebula and Rahel and others from other places. Farsana. Go ahead and put up your hand. Great. A few more. I still see a few more that haven't put up their hands. You can find the little hand icon above all the names in the main room on the left of the screen. Exactly. Yes, I see 21 people so far with their hands up. I still see a few more that haven't put their hands up, and I just want to make sure that you know about this function because it'll be really important for you to be able to participate. Great. Okay, so after, you can see that there's a little number associated with your name. That's the order in which you raised your hand. The facilitator or presenter will call on you based on this order, or based on certain topics. And so once you're called, then you press on the top button at the top left corner of the page of your screen, and then you can speak. And it'll be great to hear you. Just remember to turn off the microphone after you talk. And this microphone is the talk button on the left upper corner of your screen. So after you speak, don't forget to lower your hand, and you can lower your hand by just right-clicking on your name. And then also don't forget to deactivate your talk button. Great. So what's going on there? Let's go on to just one more tip or ground rule for our session, is that in addition to speaking in this webinar, you can also use the chat box to summarize or clarify your questions or to submit comments. So you can, we're going to ask you to submit your chat, to type in comments in the chat box, but in the moderator tab. This will go directly to the moderators, and they will be receiving your comments and then raising them in plenary. So can everyone see that there's at the bottom left corner of your screen, there's a moderator tab. If you can press on that and then submit various, yes, yeah, just submit any messages. Type in messages. So could you let me know if you can see a moderator's tab at the bottom corner of your screen? Left-hand corner of your screen. Smiley face if you can see the moderator's tab. Please give me a smiley face. Okay, I don't think people can. It seems like you can, okay. So there's a confused face from Andrea. So I think that for people who are participating, you can only see a room chat box. So just go ahead as you have been doing. This is great. Go ahead and submit your chat comments in the room chat at the bottom of your screen. That tab is fine. So let's go on now. No. So I'd like to quickly take you to this slide so that we can get a sense of who is in the room with us today. And you can also practice with some other ways of participating on this session today. So you can see that there is a map here of the world, and there is kind of like a toolbox on the left side of the map. This is the left side of the whiteboard. If you can please just pick a symbol, like there's a star or a smiley face on this toolbar on the left of the map, and put a symbol in the country where you are today. And you can put the symbol. I see lots of stars, great, and some smiley faces, great. You can put the symbol by clicking on the whiteboard, clicking your symbol on the whiteboard. Don't forget to click, otherwise we don't see it. Great. So I see we have some colleagues in Tanzania, we have colleagues in Kenya, we have lots of colleagues in the US, lots of colleagues in the UK, one colleague in France. We have some people in Canada. That's great. Thank you. Is there anyone else? Great. Wonderful. So let's go now. Thank you for your input. Please, now it would be interesting to see what organizations we come from. So if you could again take a symbol from the left toolbox. Sorry about that. Let's go back to what organizations we come from, and put your symbol on. What's going on? Why are things moving? I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening with the slide. We're back to the slide on what organizations we come from. Great. I see lots of, yes, go ahead and put your symbol in the organization where you come from, and if there's an organization that you come from that's not on the whiteboard, you can actually click on the little A, which is the fourth box in your toolbox, and write in the name of your organization, or you can also put it in the chat. I see lots of people from Cody, there's some CARE colleagues. We have colleagues from Oxfam GB, Oxfam Great Britain, Oxfam Canada. We have a colleague from Self-Help Africa. Great. Wonderful. So thank you. If there are any other people who would like to add and haven't yet, you can raise your hand if you're having trouble doing this. If not, then we will go on. Well, there's another person from Brooks World Poverty. Can someone add that to the screen, please? Brooks World Poverty, Farsana. Great. Any other organizations that are not on this slide that you are representing? Please, I'm not sure who raised your hand. Please go ahead and tell us where you come from by pressing on the talk button. We have, well, thank you for your input. We will go on now. Just a very brief who is who. These are the people who will be presenting today. We have Celia Kidder as the presenter of the findings, and then we have Sally Smith and Ralph Roothaert who will be commentating on the implications of the findings. I'm Claudia Canepa, and I'm the lead on communications for the Researching Women's Collective Action Project, and Sally Baden, who will be facilitating the discussion with me. And then we have some other people here, Hugo Sintes, Kim, monitoring the chat box, and then Sally King and Amanda on the technical assistance. So that gives you a sense of who is who. And the agenda for today is we will have about 20-25 minutes max on presentation, well, about 15 minutes on the presentation of findings. Then we'll have a very brief, some 5 minutes for you to type in your comments and questions on the chat box, and then the commentators will give their comments, and then we'll go into about an hour of discussion in plenary. And we'll wrap up with highlights and next steps. So we're very excited to have you all on, and I'll turn the floor over to Celia now for the presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening perhaps. I hope that you can hear me, and please put up a confused face or chat to the moderators if you're having any problems with hearing me. I'm starting with why we're doing the research. We as NGOs and also companies and governments all invest in farmers' organizations, but we actually know very little about which organizations work best for women farmers or why. So clearly, collective action can reduce poverty for women, but groups may also maintain inequalities. So the aim of the research is to create a base of evidence with which we can improve the strategies that support women smallholder farmers, starting with Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Mali, and then beyond. We've done 2 phases of research so far, and we have one final phase this next year. The project has already influenced a number of stakeholders to recognize that organization matters for women farmers, as well as the more common focus of credit or land. So this is the overall research question. We need to emphasize that the findings we're presenting today are preliminary. So far we know more about what collective action looks like and how it varies by sector and country and for women. We've identified a number of themes and trends and lots more questions. So we shouldn't yet jump to any conclusions, but these findings do indicate certain benefits and constraints for women, and that's how our program strategies could be improved. We know that much collective action is influenced by intervention, so the strategies that we have actually matter. And the focus of this seminar is to discuss how the findings can inform and improve our work. Here are some beginnings of answers. The headlines from the study findings are government policies matter for gender equal outcomes, and external support and expansion of commercial opportunities for smallholders often does create positive opportunities, but some cases men may also take over women's spaces and crops through these external interventions and commercial opportunities. Collective action often addresses production constraints like finance and inputs, but is seldom addressing constraints like time, poverty, mobility, land, and social norms. Various levels influence outcomes for women, not just the household level. Government policies and groups' relationships to buyers and governance and gender dynamics in families. If we're serious about gender equality in agriculture, we really need to look more closely at groups and not make assumptions. I think that's what we've learned from this phase of research. For example, the finding that groups commonly improve production more than marketing, and few groups are seen to link women to profitable markets. Women-only groups tend to bring women social support skills and scope for leadership. Specialized groups that tend to be mixed tend to deliver more economic benefits. In Ethiopia, it's often women heads of households that belong and benefit from the formal groups. Mixed groups actually vary quite a lot. It's a spectrum from a few token men to male-dominated, with a range of outcomes across all of these groups. So we need to look at what mixed groups are. Groups aren't static, they evolve in terms of membership and also functions. And research found more informal groups than expected, often outside of interventions. But formal groups tend to have informal collective action around them and embedded in them, with strong women's presence and leadership. So we need to look at informal groups. Some more about the research that's been done. In brief, we've focused research on primary level groups. The stakeholders in the first phase selected a range of subsectors with high women's participation so that the research would show how women's collective action differs in staples versus commodity exports versus high-value non-traditional exports. It's a qualitative research so far, focus groups, and we've studied over 200 groups. The conceptual framework is the basis for the research questions. It's the story of, so far, what is believed happens. Starting at the bottom here, women joining collective action depends on many factors. Their family status, kids, whether they have land, their age, literacy, mobility, also what the farming system looks like, and the distance to market. Collective action groups vary by their function, their formality, their size, their membership, and this is due to laws, interventions, networks, also the type of crop. And the outcomes we're looking at are both how the group benefits in markets and also the impact for individual women in terms of income and assets and empowerment. So these preliminary findings that I'm going to talk about are covering 18 different agricultural product markets from selected communities in 2 regions of Mali, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. And what we find is relevant are both the common themes that are coming out and also the differences between communities and sectors and countries. And I'll have time to mention only a very few of these findings. So starting with which women join and why, many factors are relevant. This came out of the focus groups discussing barriers for women joining a group in each community. And some of these have implications for our support strategies. Entry fees and lack of information are barriers. Attitudes. Ethiopia and Tanzania groups reported more negative attitudes toward women joining than in Mali, where it's often considered desirable, which may be linked to strong government promotion of credit and training for women farmers since 2004. Land tenure impacts a woman's ability to join a group. However, in Mali, although only 3% of women own plots, some older women may get access to a piece of land and have control over the proceeds, and this is less common in Ethiopia. In Tanzania, female-headed households have significantly smaller land holdings. Who joins? It appears that women with childcare responsibility participated less because relative time constraints are influencing which women are able to join. In Ethiopia, the female-headed households are more represented in the farmers' unions because of the law of only one member per household, although the overall percentage of women is still very low, only 10%. Evidence suggests that junior wives in polygamous households are less likely to join. It was reported that some women joining savings groups may be more likely to then go on and join a formal producer groups, maybe because they have more skills or because of changes in attitude about women participating. Okay, some common findings again and some interesting exceptions about patterns of collective action. As I said, government policies shape the scope of women and farmers groups through special programs and laws. External support is a significant factor in most groups' formation and evolution. It's common to find multifunctional groups. The exceptions are high-value, non-traditional exports, where groups are more specialized in marketing, more formal, more externally supported. Groups are addressing more production than collective marketing, and Tanzania had especially low incidence of collective marketing. Women's participation. We can't just study two categories of women only or mixed. It's a spectrum. Again, in Mali, there are token men in women's groups that perform tasks like transport, while in Tanzania, 75% of the groups are mixed, with a lot of women in them, and 5% are women only, which is quite different than Ethiopia and Mali. Groups evolve. The balance of women and the roles in leadership change over time. Women's membership doesn't necessarily mean leadership. And also, women who are not members may actually benefit from collective action because there are women who jointly sell through a cooperative even when they're not registered, or women who are in a household with male members. Women's participation is weaker in specialized marketing organizations, but we have some interesting exceptions like Sesame, Allanblackia, and Shea Butter. Formal groups outnumber the informal, but many women are in informal labor-sharing or savings groups like Dadu in Ethiopia, which may link to and enable the functioning of formal groups. And the evolution of groups, we've got fascinating questions raised by the findings so far about how groups evolve from one product to more, from savings to marketing, from women only to mixed, or from male-dominated to more women. And in general, women are found to join more than one group opportunistically because different groups are providing different benefits to women. So it's not just one woman, one group. Yes, we have found that collective action benefits women. The findings so far make it difficult to associate a specific benefit with a particular type of collective action or sector. And benefits aren't equitable in part because certain crops are considered men's and women's, and whether women have the right to sell a particular crop. That said, we have found 4 common benefits across a lot of the subsectors. Income benefits, greatest in non-traditional export sectors. Increased income ranked higher in Mali, lower in Tanzania. In Tanzania, income changes were more to lowering the production costs rather than achieving higher market prices. As we've said, many groups focus on improving production and also the labor sharing. About mixed groups, in Tanzania, I'm going to go down to here. Mixed groups in Tanzania did better than women's groups to overcome the restrictions placed on women by their husbands, because men were actually more aware of women's activities in the mixed groups and had more mistrust of women-only groups. And these were the benefits for women-only groups. Constraints. Focus groups identified and ranked constraints to accessing markets, and those that were especially hard for women. So, as many of us working with smallholders, the too low volumes for sale and limited capital are general constraints from the buyer's side, and from the farmer's side, transport and mobility, family responsibilities, social norms, little market information, lack of business skills, organization, and also finding that there's collusion between middlemen and wholesalers that excludes smallholders. And respondents said that collective action is helping overcoming barriers in these areas, but there are also significant gaps. Okay. Okay, it's back on. Did it go off just on this side? Okay. Okay. So I was saying that there are real issues about constraints for women in accessing markets that are not often found to be addressed by the collective action that we studied, formal or informal. That there are really basic barriers such as the social attitudes, land, time poverty, and trying to link women to profitable markets, which require better strategies and deeper change. The exceptional cases which we found that have overcome these constraints, either with groups or with policies, will be important to research in the next phase. So this is a very quick run-through of the findings from the recent phase of research. And we also have in the report, which some of you have read, many questions for the next phase of research. However, Sally Smith is going to cover some of these in her comments. So what we are asking now is to have everybody take a few minutes about these findings and submit in the chat box, preferably clicking on the Moderators tab, what your questions are for clarification. And you could put a number 1 in the beginning of your chat if this is a question for clarification. If you don't have clarification questions, which Sally, Baden, and Corinne are going to answer in a minute, please use this time to think about what findings you found the most interesting or surprising. So we're looking forward to having you sending something in now on the chat. We're going to have a couple of minutes without talking for you to send in your questions for clarification and what findings you found the most interesting or surprising. Ralph, you have your hand up. Do you want to speak? Take on the mic. We can't hear you. Could you try a chat? It's possible it would work better without the video. I'm not sure. If you just press on the talk button. Trying your mic. Okay. What would you like to ask the researchers to clarify? Likewise, what is it that, okay, Ralph? Oops. We thought we could hear you. Anything that you found particularly interesting? Okay. So I'm now going to move on to the commentators, and please keep sending in your chats. That will be very helpful. First, Sally Smith, who's on the International Advisory Group for this. I'm going to turn off my mic and have Sally take over.
Hello, everybody. Perhaps you could just give me some smiley faces if you can hear me, just to make sure I've got all the technology sorted. Great. Okay, it looks like you can hear me okay. Well, I'm very pleased to comment on this finding. As Thalia said, I'm a member of the International Advisory Group on the project, and it's a really exciting piece of work. I'd like to identify myself as a researcher rather than a practitioner, just to start off with, because that kind of forms the context of my comments, which are really kind of reflecting on the research methodology itself, perhaps rather more than the implications from a practitioner perspective. The first thing I want to say is that I really feel very strongly this is a very important addition to the knowledge base on collective action in agriculture. The detail that's contained in the report really shows the complexity of collective action and in particular women's role in collective action. And this complexity is rarely recognised. And I think that has some very important implications for all development actors and initiatives dealing with agriculture in Africa, but also beyond Africa. And some of the kind of big initiatives like CADP and AGRA and some of the Making Markets Go for the Poor programs, I think really need to be made aware of this complexity that's coming through. But I would say that for me, the phase 2 findings really raise a lot of why questions, and Thalia did refer to this, but I think in particular I'm interested in the exceptions. So, for example, in most of the specialised high-value subsectors, we find that they're dominated by men, and women only have often a very small role. But then you have an exception like shea in Mali. So we really want to know why this is the case. Why does this exception occur? And also in shea in Mali, we see that through collective action, women have managed to gain greater access to land. And again, we don't know how this occurs, what's the process, and why here and not elsewhere. So I'd really encourage some researchers to explore these exceptions, especially those that have been shown to be linked to positive outcomes for women in the next phase of the research. Another observation I have from reading the report is that the marketing function is clearly very important. There seems to be some fairly strong links between groups taking on a marketing function and acquiring greater economic benefits. But what we don't know is what brings groups to marketing itself. There are some indications that it could be related to subsector needs. So, for example, more often you find marketing in high-value sectors and more perishable goods or in particular types of value chains. But also, clearly, the policy environment has an influence. There's external influences, and we really need to understand a little bit more about how groups come to marketing and whether this function is actually transferable. So, for example, we rarely see marketing in the groups that are dealing with staple crops, but then in rice and barley we do see it. So an example like this is an exception that may help us to understand how groups come to different functions and how those functions may affect outcomes. The next point I want to make is with regard to mixed and women-only groups. I think this is really a key question for the research, and it's coming up more and more, both in the literature and in practitioner forums. The idea of supporting women-only groups in accessing markets. And we do certainly see from the research a number of social benefits of women-only groups that don't seem to be so apparent in the mixed groups. And some of these groups are particularly important when thinking about women's empowerment. But does it make sense to try and extend the functions of the women-only groups to get more of the economic benefits? So, for example, assisting them to take on marketing functions? Or would it be preferable to enhance the position of women in mixed groups? Would this be a more effective long-term strategy? So, for example, there may be opportunities to create women-only spaces within mixed groups. There may be strategies that have been successfully pursued for promoting the role of women in mixed groups. And I think this question of, and it's not going to be a question of either or, but I think we definitely need to explore in more detail the benefits, the long-term benefits of mixed versus women-only groups. I also think it's critical to know more about the factors which support or hinder collective action in different sociocultural contexts and how they've been overcome. So again, we're talking about some of the exceptions as giving us some pointers as to how these kinds of factors could be overcome. So, for example, what hinders women's collective action in sectors traditionally under women's control, and how have these constraints been overcome in the exceptional cases? So, for example, how did men's attitudes to women's collective action change in Mali? How did those changes come about? What were the different influencing factors there? Also, I think we need to be very wary of seeing women's collective action as the best tool for overcoming some of these disenabling factors. So we really need to also explore alternative strategies or complementary strategies such as introducing labour-saving technology and carrying out gender sensitization programs and so forth. To my mind, I think there's a bit of a gap in the research findings. I mean, the findings did indicate that governance structures and group dynamics can have a strong influence on outcomes, but I felt, from my experience, the leadership and missions and values of groups can have a very important influence, and I didn't feel that this came through very strongly in phase 2 findings. It's something that I think merits further exploration in the next phase. But I also feel, in relation to that we need to unpack the role of linked organisations in influencing these kinds of internal dynamics of groups. So what is the role of the second-tier organisations, the kind of cooperative unions and so forth? What's the role of buyers and external support agencies such as NGOs? And then finally, the findings suggest that there are some changes going on in intra-household gender relations where women are able to contribute more to household incomes as a result of their collective action. And this is a really critical area of change for women's economic empowerment. And I think we really need to dig deep and find out more about how and when this occurs. So, for example, is it only happening where groups have a marketing function? Are there other situations in which those kinds of changes are happening, and why are those changes happening in those particular cases? And what does it all mean in terms of women's empowerment? So just to wrap up, I think I want to kind of reiterate what is said in the report itself and what Thea said in her presentation, that I think we should be somewhat cautious in drawing conclusions from this phase of the research until we've answered some of these questions, and I'm sure other questions that you're going to raise in the next hour or so. I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Hi, thank you very much, Sally. That was great. And we're going to move on now to Ralph and his comments about implications or ideas for Oxfam's agriculture program coming out of this research. Over to you, Ralph. Ralph was going to send a chat to say that he was going to move to another computer. We may not be quite ready for Ralph. Yeah. So I think I'm going to ask Kim then to raise some of the questions for clarification, and then we will come back to Ralph. So we're skipping ahead. And Kim has been reading the questions for clarification and will now speak them, and Sally and Corinne can answer. Thanks.
Hi, this is Kim. Could you give me a smiley face to let me know that you can hear me? Can everyone hear me? Is that better? Great. Okay, hi. A key question that came up was, could you kindly share how you define formal and informal sectors, and discuss briefly the significance of this finding? Another question was status in HHS, and how does age affect? And finally, the token man. Does the man join on invitation from the women, or just by accident, but with positive results? Those are the three questions raised on clarification. No.
Can you hear me now? Can you put, this is Sally speaking. If you can hear me.
Hello? Can people hear me?
This is Sally speaking. If you can hear me, could you please just give a smile? Ralph, we've just started into the clarifications while we were waiting for you. So I'm just going to deal with the questions that have been asked, and then we'll come back to you for your input, if that's all right. Okay, so myself, Sally Baden, and Corinne Pionetti, who's also on the line, will just respond briefly to those questions. So I just want to clarify first that we co-authored the paper, which you will have received in advance of the webinar, and hopefully some of you have been able to read at least part of it. But that paper was synthesizing findings of country studies in Ethiopia, Mali, and Tanzania, which were carried out with support from Corinne and other advisors by teams of country researchers. So Corinne and myself weren't doing all of the field work. We have been synthesizing findings from the different country teams. In respect of the first question, which was about definitions of formal and informal, and what the significance of this finding is in terms of the extent of informal collective action. So I believe that was Anne Saralzulo from Oxfam America who asked that question, and just to refer you, if you have a copy of the paper, to Annex 4 of the paper, where there is some more detail on this. Basically, we had a kind of system for categorizing groups along different dimensions, of which degree of formality was one, the others being function, women's participation and leadership, and the degree of external support. And so for all the collective action groups that were studied, a characterization was done using these dimensions, and for each of these dimensions we defined different levels, if you like. So for the informal and formal, we were looking at whether groups were legally registered, whether they had links into wider networks, whether they were legally registered but independent and autonomous, whether they were semi-formal in the sense of having regular meetings and well understood bylaws, perhaps in the process of becoming formalized, or whether they were fairly informal in the sense of having agreed rules and procedures but nothing that was documented. And so obviously it's, again, like the other features, it's a spectrum. And it's quite difficult to categorize particular groups sometimes, also partly because groups obviously evolve. In terms of the significance of it, I think as development actors, we often go into interventions thinking that groups need to be more structured and formalized and registered. And this has a certain rationale to it, particularly in terms of economic relationships to other market actors. And policy frameworks also, in some cases, are tending to sort of push groups to a higher degree of formalization by introducing changes to policies around association and the formation of cooperatives. And so to the extent that formalization in ways of organizing impacts on whether and how women tend to participate in and benefit from those groups, this is, I think, a very significant finding. And if we relate it to, firstly, the findings about the barriers that women face in terms of time, in terms of entry fees, and sometimes in terms of specific membership criteria, we can see that there may be some issues here. Formal groups may tend to be less flexible in the way that they function and therefore accommodate women's specific needs less, for example. So I'm going to pause there and ask Corinne if she wants to add anything to that response about the implications of the findings around formal and informal groups.
Hello, everybody.
Corinne.
Yes, I can. Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Okay, there's an echo. I don't have much to add to what you said. Maybe I can go to answering question 2. Good. The issue of status in the household. I think Abu Bakr raised the question. We didn't have a lot of records of the age of the participants, and we'll have more data on this in phase 3. What we observed, however, is that, as mentioned by Celia, a lot of participants tend to be middle-aged or older women, some younger women also, but we figure there's more issues in terms of time constraints weighing down younger women. The issue of status, however, is very significant in polygamous households, both in Mali and Ethiopia, and to a much smaller extent in Tanzania. And we found that in a polygamous household, maybe only one wife would be involved in a collective action group, and she would have a better capacity to influence decision making in the household, or to be consulted by her husband. So being a member of a collective action group, whether it's a mixed group or woman-only group, in a polygamous household seems to make a difference in terms of status, and that's something we need to investigate more. I'll give a brief my sort of impression on question 3, on the token man. That happened mostly in Mali, in women-only groups, around Share, for instance, or Sesame. We found men being involved in either playing secretarial role or helping the women do transportation of produce to the market. And I think, yes, mostly women invited these men because either they didn't have the literacy skills to do the secretarial work, or they were constrained in their mobility. But again, further work will be needed to really clearly understand the role that these men play. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Can you hear me? Good. This is Sally again. Just to add a tiny bit onto that response to the last question. So, as Corinne said, it's something that we need to investigate further, but it was very striking to us in Mali that women were very explicit that they required one or two men to be in their groups in order to do things that they were not able to do, such as be in encounters with local authorities, for example, where in communities where women were not formally allowed to cross the threshold into the chief's household. But what was also interesting, and why we sort of characterized it as a token man, was the sense that women had that once they had overcome certain constraints, for example, if it was around literacy, that they might no longer need those men to play the function. But at the same time, clearly they valued the functions that men could play that they couldn't, even to the extent in some instances of naming the groups after the man. And so it was kind of quite an interesting, I think for us, nuanced understanding of how women perceive the role of men in their groups. Are there any other questions for clarification? There's one jumping around the whiteboard that I can't. Can you say one more time the barriers in? I can't read. But that governs the four. Okay, I can't read the rest of the question. Okay, so.
Hi, Sally, this is Anuj.
Yeah, just tell me your question.
I was saying that, can you say one more time, what are the barriers from the legislation point of view that for women to join or work within the formal organization and collective setting? For example, you mentioned in the presentation, Celia mentioned that in Ethiopia, 10% women participate roughly, or the participation in cooperatives is represented by 10% women, and they are mostly coming from women-headed households because of the legislation that only one member, one household, one membership. So if you could just outline some of the legislative barriers that you found in different cases in countries.
Thank you, Anuj. I'm assuming you can still hear me unless I'm told otherwise. So I think this is a very interesting question in the sense that what the research has identified has been a significant number of changes in the legislative framework, both directly relating to collective action and that indirectly sort of inform other kinds of barriers that may prevent women from specifically participating. So you rightly identify the issue. Of one member per household as being a constraint, and that's something which I think has been quite a generalized, at least practice, if not a direct legislative barrier, in the sense that the cooperative membership has been constructed around a sort of household level membership rather than an individual membership. And the relatively recent legislation in Mali, for example, has clarified that individuals are members of cooperatives and they can be from the same household. But that doesn't necessarily mean that changes have happened in terms of how the law is applied in practice. And I think in most countries there have been some significant positive changes in the legislative framework, and there are barriers in the kind of way that they are applied in practice. We know, for example, that a number of organizations, including Oxfam and also Self-Help Africa in Ethiopia, have been trying to look at the way that those legislative frameworks get implemented in practice on the ground and trying to promote new practices such as dual membership in households. So that's one aspect in terms of legislative barriers. I mean, obviously there are a whole number of other issues around the different types of organization that producers are able to form and join, and what kinds of capacities the law gives those organizations. So that's not necessarily just about cooperative law, it can also be around the laws on association, company laws, and so on and so forth. And this isn't an aspect that we've been able to really study in depth, but possibly one that might be worth either in the context of this work or more broadly looking into in more detail, because it's also an area of lots of dynamic change with increased liberalization, commercialization, and attention to private sector investment in agriculture. Okay, so I hope that's enough in terms of clarification, and we're going to hand back to Ralph to give his slightly delayed but still very sought after input on the study. Are you there, Ralph? No, Ralph. Ralph, are you there? I don't see him in the room, actually. Is either Ralph or Naomi there from Tanzania?
Can you hear me? I'm talking now.
Oh, hooray.
Yes, I'm here.
We can hear you perfectly now.
And oh, great. So shall I start, Claudia?
Yes, go ahead. Thanks, Ralph.
Okay. No. Okay. So I'm using Naomi's computer. It's a bit confusing, but the most important thing is that you hear me. So please let me know if you don't hear me, Claudia. I'll wait for you to interfere. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the implications of the research, and I'm going to touch upon three major areas. One is the external influences of women collective action across the countries, and external influences I'm talking about cultural influences, influences by the government, and influences by NGOs. Secondly, about the importance of other movements, and thirdly, about the degree of formality of groups and the relevance or the implications for our work. Next slide. Can somebody? Okay. Okay. So how do external factors influence women collective action and agricultural value chains in the market system? For Oxfam livelihood strategies, market access for smallholder farmers is incredibly important. And we use a value chain approach to increase the efficiency and the transparency of transactions, and that will result in better benefits for women and men producers. Women collective action is a very important strategy, as outlined in the research paper, in terms of getting more benefits from markets to women producers. And women collective action is influenced by external factors. Oxfam needs to influence the enabling environment, because the enabling environment are the collection of external factors, and Oxfam also needs to influence the services. Now, what kind of enabling environment do we see? And that's what the blue area you see in this slide. First of all, the cultural restrictions, as we see in Mali, they are much more serious than in Ethiopia. They are much more serious than in Mali or Tanzania. The women-only groups in Ethiopia are very weak in terms of influencing the value chain, and the power of married women tend to be minimal in the absence of their husbands. And also what we see in Ethiopia, that we are operating in an environment, in a cultural environment that is very difficult for us to change. So in terms of programmatic work, what we can do is we can create pockets of gender innovation and increase the visibility of that kind of innovation that we have achieved. And in turn, another external factor that we see in the enabling environment is what the government does. And we see that government campaigns can be very effective, as is demonstrated in the Mali case, where policies supporting the advancement of women since 2004 have greatly benefited women collective action. And this has also contributed to the recognition of and power of women-only groups. And women-only groups in other countries, for instance, don't have that same power. So government campaigns incredibly important, can be important. The other area related to government is policies. The one member per household practice is disadvantageous for women membership in cooperatives in Ethiopia, we have seen. Whereas on the other hand, there is a favorable land policy in Mali for women that override the disadvantages of the customary land practices. So there's again an opportunity for campaigns to influence better policies and practices with regard to women collective action and their access to resources and market success. So what are these implications for us? Oxfam as a facilitating organization, facilitating value chains, we operate in the blue and the orange boxes, up and down. Those are the external factors, and we tend not to operate in the value chain itself. That is the middle row of boxes, and all the cultural and government and NGO external factors that we've talked about are exactly in those two boxes: enabling environment and services. So we need to derive lessons. We use these lessons to better our work. Hoping to go to the next slide. Can somebody, maybe Claudia, can you put the next slide, please?
I think you might have skipped over one. Oh no, sorry.
Okay, there it goes. So we've looked at external. We've looked at external initiatives and external and enabling environments, but we also need to recognize the importance of other initiatives and movements to reach scale. And the paper has already indicated that there are many NGOs and some government programs that promote group formation. And it is indeed very difficult to reach scale without those programs of NGOs and government programs. And in addition, we need to make use of farmer and gender networks. And we need to make use of women empowerment initiatives. We need to, as a second point, the programs need to piggyback on existing positive internal or external movements that affect women organizations in agriculture. For instance, good leadership. There are good members of parliament or chief executive officers of private sector companies that have an exemplary role on the betterment of women. Or in terms of role models, in the rural areas we have innovative women farmers that have a leading position. We need to promote and enforce those positive areas. In terms of degree of the formality of groups, what we see in paper, we find that the definition between formal and informal groups in collective action is often very blurred. It's difficult to make in its blur. For instance, in Tanzania, we have formal groups, but those formal groups have informal components of saving groups. It is also more difficult to identify or access informal groups in the field because of their informal nature. They are not registered, so you can't easily see where they are. And proper assessment of these formal groups needs more time from the researchers because it is more difficult to access them. And we realize now from the findings that informal groups have a lot of advantages that formal groups don't have. What we also see that in Mali, the formal groups trigger the formation of informal groups upstream, that is towards the production. And this could be a lead to
Sorry, it's back now. Okay.
I lost you, but can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ralph.
The only problem is that I don't have moderating. Okay. Can somebody move to the next page? Because I can't do that anymore. No, one page back. Yeah, that's the last. To wrap up, the programmatic value chain approaches need to focus on enabling environments. And this research has provided important lessons on cultural institutions from which contextual guidelines can be formed on group formation. The lessons that we've learned are all context specific, but nevertheless they are very important lessons for the individual countries. And we should link our approaches of facilitating women collective action with dynamic movements that happens regardless. And the lessons on informal women collective action are very diverse. And we need more research to draw general conclusions or link findings to conditions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Asanteni in Kiswahili means
and Sally.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for your comments. Great. Thank you very much, Ralph, for your comments. It's really great to be able to hear your reactions on the findings so far and some of the implications that you're seeing for program work. especially since others may not know that you're the coordinator for the Tanzania Agricultural
I'm hearing her in the room, but not on the headphone.
In Tanzania. So, and I also want to thank Sally Smith for your comments. You raised some very insightful comments about some of the exceptions that we should be looking into further, as well as some good probing questions to help us better interpret the research. So thanks to you both, as well as Celia, for your presentations. We'll go now to the discussion in plenary. So I'll pass the floor over to Sally, who will facilitate this discussion. Over to you, Sally.
Me. Okay, so I am just wanting to check that people can still hear me before we get into the flow of discussion. Could you please put a thumbs up or a smile or whatever your preferred positive sign is if you can hear me. So please, active indication of whether you can hear me. Thanks. Well, I'm getting some people saying they can hear at least. Great. So many of you have been chatting in comments on what you found interesting or surprising or other aspects you wanted to comment on. So we're going to kick off the first part of this discussion for the next 15 or 20 minutes with just a quick review of some of those comments, which I'm going to ask Hugo, who's been closely monitoring the chat box, to give us a flavor of the comments. Go ahead, Hugo.
That's my microphone. Is it working? Hello? Hello? Does it work? Can you hear me?
Up more.
Yeah,
We can hear you.
Hello?
So Hugo
Hello?
just getting on the line.
Hello? Hello? You can hear me well now? Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'll share. My name is Hugo Sintesa. Some of you know me. I manage Oxfam's Enterprise Development Program, which is supporting farmer organizations, both women-only and mixed, in 15 Oxfam programs in 15 countries. So some of the comments that people made, a few people showed some disappointment that a lot of the barriers that we found are not new. So, for example, Alison Massey says some of these issues are long-standing. How come we? I mean, I'm not using your exact words, Alison, but how come we have not solved some of these yet? Nina King agrees. It's you know, these things are not new, but it is surprising that, you know, we keep finding them as barriers again and again. Just another thing that Nina added, that a surprising fact was that some of the barriers cannot be addressed necessarily through collective action. Collective action solves some of the barriers, but not necessarily all of them. Sally Smith, in her comments, also said it is important to think of innovative ways of addressing some of those barriers in parallel or outside collective action, potentially. If I can share very briefly some of the experience from EDP as well, I think that the problem we face quite often is that the barriers, the list is so long, and the time and resources we have to address all of them, women's limited, confidence, land, assets, you know, etc., etc. Sometimes we have limited time. So what we have been trying to do using Oxfam's methodologies to prioritize those and put resources on some of them, and also, be flexible and go where the energy is. And we've had some successes in some places, and not necessarily in all of them. Okay, so probably an area both that's worth keeping exploring the barriers one. A lot of debate on policy. A few people, Alison again, Abu Bakr, on saying definitely let's look at the role of government and policy in trying to change the laws for cooperatives, a number of people, etc. Anne in particular says that she has experience in that area. Abu Bakr said that we have to watch out for, as Sally Baden also talked about, the relationship between formal policy and local laws. And Anush also says it's not only the policy but the resources that the government puts, for example, towards finance or other things, so the government role more widely. A few people commented on the surprise of finding both mixed and women only having some particular benefits. That's basically what people said. If I have another 20 seconds, I'll say two things that surprised me, having seen 15 of these projects very emerging in different parts of the world, and then seeing the research. I think that the issue of economic benefits is one that we have to explore in more detail. What is it exactly that we mean by economic benefits? Sometimes it will be by selling at a higher price. Sometimes it will be by saving some money by accessing cheaper labor or inputs. Also liked as a surprising thing to see this link between informal and formal. And I really like very much something that comes up as the evolution. I think that the fact that some leadership will emerge in one mix and then consolidate in women only, or vice versa, and the fact that things are organic are important things to keep in mind. Leadership, very critical. Ralph mentioned that we see that in all the EDP Enterprise Development Program projects. A leader in New Farm Company helping women problems in Palestine. A leader from Katani in Tanzania helping women farmers, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugo, with some highlights there of people's different comments. So we're going to actually have some more direct discussion now. So that was some initial reactions that people gave. So people who would like to comment, please raise your hand. I see one hand already, which is Gina Castillo from Oxfam America. Gina, go ahead and press your talk button to make your comment. Can you hear me, Gina?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Could you turn up your volume, because I don't think we can quite hear you.
I sent it as a question. It might be easier in the chat. But
apparently others can hear you, so go ahead.
Well, I was just interested in understanding more this dynamic between the informal and the formal, and I think it was Talia that mentioned that many women are participating in the informal groups, and that enables them to participate perhaps more effectively in the formal groups. So I was just thinking about it in terms of the time poverty. If women have to do both of these things, it just adds to their burden. I was just trying to understand the situation better. I don't know if my question is clear.
Yes, the question is clear, or the comment is clear. Just a couple of reflections on that. So I think the comment about that there are two separate comments. One was about the relationship between women's engagement in informal collective action and the sort of functioning of formal collective action. So how does the fact that women are often in informal collective action complement or support formal collective action where they are less well represented? And then a different point, which I think Julia made, which was about the fact that sometimes women who have been in informal collective action may feel more confident of and able then to take on roles in formal groups. So I completely get your point about time poverty, and also where we're saying that some women may join different groups or they may change. And we don't have a clear answer to that, and it's something we would need, I think, to investigate a lot more at sort of individual and household levels. But I think that a couple of things we can say. One is that it seems as though women's predominance in informal groups is to some extent a reflection of their time poverty, because the requirements and demands of formal participation are higher. So just to give an example, for women to transport their goods to a collection centre where the formal vegetable marketing cooperative is collecting vegetables to supply to a supermarket in Dar es Salaam, they may have difficulty in actually participating in that way and getting their produce to the collection centre. How do they resolve that problem? They informally organise, delegate one woman to do the transport, and thereby get their goods into the formal system. But they have to do that. They have to organise informally in order to have that access, because they can't, as women, travel the distance to the formal collection centre. So that's an example of how that kind of informal organisation complements women's or supports women's participation in the formal. And I think there were also other examples of that we had highlighted from Mali of how women group together in subgroups at hamlet level in order to supply the formal cooperatives. So I hope that's the beginning of an answer, but I agree it's something we need to look into a lot more. I now have a hand from Anush, who would like to comment.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks, Gina. Just kind of, paraphrasing the same question from a different point of view. Can we say with any confidence that, because formal structures attract more resources?
Anish, I've lost you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Hello? Okay.
Yes.
I was saying
yes.
that paraphrasing.
Yes, we can hear you.
Paraphrasing what the last question was, can we say with confidence, or any confidence, that because formal structures attract more resources from the government, from the private sector, and hence that space is predominantly controlled by men, and hence that creates a barrier for women, and if that is so, then is there a reason for creating alternative formal structure mechanisms for women? So I'm probably this is the second part of the same question that you just answered. Thanks.
Thanks, Anish. I'm wanting this to be a discussion, and so rather than me answer that question, which I can offer some thoughts on, but perhaps if others have ideas about whether because formal structures attract more support, that leads to men taking over, and therefore we need parallel or alternative structures. Do other people have comments on that? Please raise your hand. or indicate if you would like to speak on that point or on any other point that's related. Somebody raised their hand. Daniela.
Right. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Great. Yes, I would phrase the question slightly differently, and maybe you'll find this out in phase 3. That I think the interrelationship between the informal smaller groups and the larger formal groups is more complex than just the formal groups get the resources and so they're hijacked, in quotation marks, by men. It could be...
Danny, we've lost you.
Hello, can you still hear me? Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, well, I don't know if anyone else can hear Danny, but I've lost her.
Can you hear me now?
While we're waiting for Sandra again, if anyone else wants to come in on that point, feel free.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear anything? Here. Hello? Okay, can someone hear me? Good. I'm not sure what happened there. I don't know where you lost me, but the point I was trying to make is that maybe the relationship between the smaller informal groups and the larger formal groups is more complicated than indicated in the previous comment, and that cultural factors in particular could make it easier and more attractive for women to participate in informal groups. I mean, one of the questions would be, in a situation where a woman doesn't have any control over the income that she gets from selling her milk, vegetables, honey, what are her incentives to join a formal group to increase her production? Stop.
Is she?
Danny? Sally Smith has indicated she wants to comment. Go ahead, Sally.
Hi. Yeah, I think I put a comment in the chat box as well, that I think the question of overcoming, or rather addressing, the gender division of labour, but also I think what Danielle was talking about, the international gender relations, is something that would be really helpful to hear from participants around strategies that they've used in terms of perhaps bringing about change in men's attitudes. I mean, there was the example of government policy or government campaigning having an influence in Mali, but I'm just wondering if there are other strategies used by NGOs and other development actors that have proven to be effective in that sense. Because I think my sense is that if women continue to be, or rather they're opting for informal groups or participation in informal groups, not out of a position of choice, or rather they don't see the space that's available to them because of these various barriers and constraints. So perhaps we should be focusing more on, my gut feeling is we should be focusing more on addressing the gender relations and the gender division of labour in the household, and getting them, I know this is a big ask, but getting women greater access to mixed organisations, the benefits of mixed organisations through that route. I just wonder what other people think.
Thanks, Sally. Do other people have ideas about that? Either about strategies that have been successful in sort of challenging gender roles in ways that have enabled women to participate more in mixed groups, or other ideas about whether we should be focusing more on that as a strategy. Any other contributions on that point? Gina, I still have your hand. Did you want to come back? Gina Castillo, did you
No,
want to
I'm sorry. I didn't take up my hand. I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, so somebody's hand is up. Corinne and Andrea. So Corinne first, and then Andrea, and then if we have one other comment after that, and then we'll move on. Go ahead, Corinne. Corinne?
Yes. Just a quick point about one particular model in Tanzania, which I came across and don't know much about, but maybe Ralph could elaborate a little bit on this. The ULT or UTL model, which is around vegetable, mainly, I think, in one part of Tanzania, and where basically there was a direct link between a buyer in a city and different groups of producers. And what was interesting in that model is that it wasn't household-based. Every farmer, individual farmer, could place an order or provide for an order for a particular crop, a vegetable crop. So the woman had full membership and full control over choosing how to place an order or answer an order by producing. And that seemed, at least, at first observation, it seemed to solve the issue of women's lack of control over income, which Daniela was referring to, which is very critical in most formal organizations, where in any case women don't have a lot of control over income. In this particular model, this UIT model, which I think we'll probably try to investigate more when in phase 3 in Tanzania, because women could individually produce within that particular model or system, they could control the income. They were fully in charge of what they were doing in terms of decision making also, and that seemed to resolve at least some of the issues. So I'd like to hear more about similar strategies if there's anything else. Thanks.
Thank you, Kareem, for that specific example. So Andrea, and then Ralph, and I think then we'll close this section of the discussion. Andrea.
Thanks, Sally. I just wanted to say that, in Bangladesh, when we were working with collectives on markets interventions, we had found that it was really important to also work at a household level around gender relations. I don't have a specific study to quote from, but we also found that quite difficult to do because the work at the household level around gender relations required, long-term accompaniment sort of action, and so we found it was better to do it in separate interventions almost, where you could bring staff who were skilled around social analysis, around intervening around gender relations, to work with households, as well as others then who could work more directly with the collectives that were linked to producers and market access. But the other thing that we found as well was the importance that elites or local power holders in communities play in the way collectives get managed, and the access that particularly poorer categories of women had. And I was wondering, I had put a question there earlier, I was wondering if there were any findings about the role of elite or local power holders and the effect they have on the benefits that poorer women are able to derive from their participation in collective action.
Ralph, can you speak now? Well, just about, but if you could increase your volume, it would help. I'm not hearing you, Ralph. I can tell that you're speaking, but it's not loud enough to hear. Are you able to get closer to the mic or increase the volume? Okay. Maybe you could chat in your comments. So I'm just going to wrap up this section and then hand it over to talk more about the implications. So just on that one question you raised, Andrea, about the role of local power holders, I don't think we have many new insights into this. I think it does relate strongly to the issue of leadership and governance and the role that wider stakeholders play in that. We did have some indications that in Ethiopia, because of the highly kind of politicized nature of local power structures, that may be something affecting the way in which women participate in formal cooperatives, for example. But I think this is something we need to look into more, including, for example, how the extent to which women are involved in local government and other structures changes the parameters for women's participation and benefits. So I'm going to hand over now to Claudia, who is just going to try and help us think about the implications of all this. Claudia, thank you all very much for your comments.
Thank you, Sally, and thanks to all for your comments. I want to take us now to the next to talk more about how what are the ideas. What ideas do the findings lead you to for your work? So I'd like to start out by posing a question for you, which is, in what areas are you thinking to improve your agricultural or markets program work or your policy work for generating better outcomes for women? So this is just some options here in terms of policy context. B, more rigorous selection of groups to support considering formal and informal groups. C is address gender-specific barriers to women participating. D is support groups to evolve and improve functions, and E is any other area that has come to mind as a result of these discussions we've had today. So just so we can have something visual, if you could put a sign, a symbol in the area that you think has been most compelling for you. So go ahead and grab a symbol and put it under the column that makes most sense to you. this is fascinating to see that there's a lot of symbols around the gender-specific barriers, as well as how supporting groups to evolve and improve function. Now I'm seeing a few more under policy context. I'd like to welcome you now to put any comments into the chat box. Anything specific that you'd like to say about any of these areas. So, can you add these? So we'll add Abu Bakr your ticks for C and D. Great, we're adding them for you. Great. Great. So thanks for your comments. I'd like to open the floor up now for anybody who would like to say something. Any ideas on these areas that you'd want to share with us? Feel free to raise your hand. So, Abu Bakr, you mentioned that for Mali it's C and D. Could you say a bit more on this? Or any other implications that come to mind for the program in Mali?
Do you hear me? Okay. Yeah. I think from our
I can hear you, Abu Bakr. Go
in
ahead.
Mali and also from the women, the pilot project on gender, we have noticed that social barriers are kind of key constraints on women's empowerment. Therefore, we think that we need to put more focus on trying to address those key constraints so as to ensure a better participation of women into collectives, and economic empowerment. Also, we realize that the functions, women are involved into production functions, but there is a very non-existing, not much existing support to marketing functions, and so we think that that will be a key area we will address also, because most of the groups we are working with in Mali are groups that are already existing, so we don't want to influence so much the choice. We think it's a self-made choice and we want to respect that. But in terms of functions, there are key functions like when we take the Saving for Change initiatives in Mali also, where there is a clear idea on how to bring women into production activities, more agricultural production functions to couple with their saving skills to ensure more economic empowerment. So in the future, we think that we'll have more focus on addressing social barriers, which are really much stronger in Mali compared to other countries. So we think that this specific gender barriers need to be addressed differently than we did in the past, and also that we need to really move to supporting key production functions and key marketing functions. Yeah. Is it clear, or should I add that?
No, that's very clear. Thank you, Abu Bakr. That's great. I know that there's another. Jessan would like to ask a question. Jessan, over to you. So Jessan is asking, I'd like to ask about the impact of pro-women buyers on women's collective action. Would someone like to answer this question? Sally? Or Thalia?
Go ahead.
This is Hugo. There's a question on the pro-women buyers. I mean, I can share the experience from Palestine, and Mohammed, you're on the line, so you could add to that. But I think that, for example, in Palestine, a trading company that commits to buying from women and sell products that women produce will be a huge value to what Oxfam is doing. In the experience of Palestine, I think that the company has had to source both from women and other sort of groups to make sure that they have a diversified supply. So it won't be necessarily that a buyer will buy from women only, but if they can use both women and other sort of groups that might be bigger, where there may be mainly men, that can be a huge energy for the program.
Thanks, Hugo. Just to add a little bit on that, I'm not sure, Jessan, whether you have your own experience of pro-women buyers. It would be interesting to hear if you do. But just to kind of support what Hugo is saying, that I think that we've had experiences more maybe of working with private companies or trading companies that have needed to be helped to recognize the importance of seeing women as part of their client group or the group that they're buying from, and recognize the key role that women may be playing, for example, in the quality of production and output, the quality of supply, as well as enabling them to achieve the volumes they need. So I think with some buyers like Ambrosia in Ethiopia, and I think also companies that we've worked with in dairy in Colombia, there's been a kind of a journey there of private sector actors kind of realizing more the benefits of their direct engagement with women in key functions along the value chain. I don't know that I've had so much experience of buyers who present themselves as being pro-women, but if you have any examples of that, Jessan, we'd really like to hear.
Thanks very much, Sally, for your last comment. I'm aware of time, so I would like to take us to just some highlights. I'd like to see if you could tell us just a few, open up the floor to anyone who'd like to say some final remarks before we close the webinar. Any final remarks or any highlights that you've heard from the discussion today that you'd like to share? Just to give space to others. Okay. Well, then I'll just say that it's been wonderful to be able to share these findings with you and be able to hear the comments from Sally Smith and from Ralph, and then be able to engage in a discussion with you. We have more than 40 people join us today from more than 10 organizations. So thank you all. I'm going to just pass it over to Sally for her to just quickly tell us about phase 3 research, so you know what's next, and then we'll close.
Okay, I hope you can all still hear me.
Yes.
Just to pick up a few of the threads from this discussion. So looking forward then, some of the issues and questions that have been raised in this phase that we've talked about in this conversation will be how we shape the focus of the next phase of research. So some of that will be about, as Sally Smith highlighted, exploring the exceptions. So the examples of sectors which are highly profitable, where women have managed to retain control, how has that happened? Or the examples of mixed groups where women have been able to achieve a significant degree of leadership. The examples of informal savings groups or labour groups that have been able to evolve a marketing function. Obviously we need, as it's been pointed out, to understand much more the relationship between collective action and women's participation in it and gender relations at household level, both in the sense of the constraints that women face to their participation and the benefits they derive. And that will also be something we will need to focus on a lot more in the next stage. So, for example, how do women negotiate with other household members on their participation in different kinds of groups and activities, and to what extent are other household members flexible in adapting to these new activities, what enables those kind of changes in not just attitudes but also practices at household level. And I think, the important points that Danny raised about what actually are the incentives for women to engage in collective action, which relate to the extent to which they control the benefits at household level, and how can we really build those incentives and build the role of collective action in allowing women to control more the benefits. So those are some of the areas we will be thinking about focusing on, looking particularly at what kinds of interventions have really supported those positive exceptions and positive evolutions, and what kinds of interventions maybe have enabled more sort of transformative outcomes at household level. So that's in terms of the more qualitative focus of the work going forward between now and June next year, is looking at which strategies have been effective and why. And we will carry out a number of case studies across the 3 different countries. And right now we are reflecting on, and will jointly reflect with the country teams on the criteria for selecting those case studies, based both on our findings and on people's different ideas about where we can gain the most insights and where these exceptions can be found. And then the second aspect of the work is really to try to get much more robust data from household surveys and surveys of individual women on which women are really participating and benefiting. And as we highlighted earlier, this won't just be people who are formal members, but we'll look at also the wider benefits on households of different types of membership, whether direct or indirect. And it's very important, I think, for us to know this, to know who is really being reached by different types of collective action and who is left out, to inform the design of these and complementary strategies going forward. So I think that's all we've got time for now. I'm going to hand you back to Claudia to close the session, and thank you all very much for your questions, comments and insights.
Thank you, Sally. And thank you all for engaging with us on this research and your insights and comments today. As I mention this webinar is part of a series of webinars on women's collective action that Oxfam, CARE, and CODI are co-organizing, and we have 3 more webinars coming up next year. You have here a preliminary schedule of those 3 webinars. So please go ahead and keep keep up to date by visiting us at womenscollectiveaction.com. There you will have a summary of this webinar as well as information on upcoming webinars. So thank you very much. That's fine.